This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Another massive atrocity at the hands of ISIS terrorists, plus a major setback for the president's immigration overhaul. We'll discuss both issues with Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson live on set in just a few minutes. First, multiple reports say terrorists have burned to death 45 people in the western Iraqi town of al-Baghdadi. This comes as Egypt bombs terrorist locations in Libya following the massive beheading of 21 Coptic Christians. Today in Washington, Vice President Biden met with city officials about how to keep that kind of violence from coming here. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry reports on a terror group that appears to be gaining ground and, at least for now, putting the president on the defense. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. The president just a short time ago met in the Oval Office with his new defense secretary, Ash Carter. He again vowed to the American people that he will dismantle ISIS, but this is a terror group that right now is very much on the march. Grisly images of 17 Kurdish fighters being paraded in cages by ISIS terrorists, just like the Jordanian pilot whose death shocked the world. Except this time, the fighters were part of a much larger group, 45 Iraqis in all, allegedly burned alive in western Iraq. This brings the gruesome body count to 66 in days, when you consider the beheading of 21 Christians in Libya. On top of this latest tragedy reported by a local Iraqi police chief and not denied by State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki.
I have seen the reports. The last I talked to our team, Ed, we did not have confirmation of that independently from here.
The latest atrocity came as Vice President Biden kicked off a three-day summit on violent extremism.
We need answers that go beyond a military answer.
Along those lines, State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf suggested jobs may help defeat ISIS, drawing some ridicule from an MSNBC anchor.
We cannot win this war by killing them. We cannot kill our way out of this war. We need, in the longer term, medium and longer term, to go after the root causes that leads people to join these groups, whether it's lack of opportunity for jobs.
We're not going to be able to stop that in our lifetime or 50 lifetimes.
Harf took to Twitter today to note former President George W. Bush also said fighting poverty is an answer to terror. Though retired General Jack Keane said tools like the economy and social media can only go so far in the fight against ISIS.
In front of us is ISIS, who is marauding over Iraq and Syria and now Libya. The only way to stop them is to kill and capture.
While Pope Francis, for the second straight day, said the Coptic Christians killed Sunday were martyrs.
Pray for our brother Copts, whose throats were slit for the sole reason of being Christian.
The White House only put out a written statement Sunday from Josh Earnest that condemned the cowardly murder of 21 Egyptian citizens, with no mention of their faith. Though in the case of 3 Muslim students killed at the University of North Carolina last week, the White House put out a written statement by the president that specifically said nobody, quote, should ever be targeted because of how they worship, even though it's unclear what led to their deaths. Today, Attorney General Eric Holder took a swipe at Fox News when asked at a forum about why the administration will not call out Islamic extremism.
We spend more time talking about what do you call it, as opposed to what do you do about it. You know, I mean, really, if Fox didn't talk about this, they'd have nothing else to talk about.
While the vice president used the summit to note there's a large Somali community in his home state of Delaware.
There's an awful lot of driving cabs and are friends of mine, for real. I'm not being solicitous. I'm being serious.
Now, while the White House will not call out the weekend attack as an atrocity against Christians, one senior Democrat did today. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, where there's a large Coptic community, said specifically that they were killed, murdered this weekend because of their Christian faith. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. President Obama's efforts to keep as many as 5 million illegal immigrants from facing deportation are on hold tonight. A federal judge has temporarily blocked the executive action. And there is plenty of reaction from both sides tonight. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel.
Late today, just before part of his executive action on immigration was due to take effect, President Obama weighed in on U.S. District Judge Andrew Hanen in Texas, slamming on the brakes on his immigration plan with a preliminary injunction.
I disagree with the Texas judge's ruling, and the Justice Department will appeal. This is not the first time where a lower court judge has blocked something or attempted to block something that ultimately was shown to be lawful.
In a memo, the judge wrote once the president's action started, quote, "This genie would be impossible to put back into the bottle. so Haanen put it on hold. Tim O'Brien is an attorney who has covered the Supreme Court for 2 decades.
To get a temporary injunction, you usually have to show 2 things. One is that there will be some irreparable harm if an injunction is not issued, and 2, that it's likely that you will succeed on the merits.
The delay gave a group of 26 states suing to oppose the president's action more time. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell praised the injunction, saying, quote, "This ruling underscores what the president has already acknowledged publicly 22 times. He doesn't have the authority to take the kinds of actions he once referred to as ignoring the law and unwise and unfair." The case is expected to go to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, where analysts expect it will be addressed swiftly.
I expect they'll get this case in the next couple of days. I would be surprised if this injunction were still with us in a week, and I would expect the plaintiffs, the states, then would take it to the United States Supreme Court, which would deny review.
Timing is critical, with a funding extension for the Department of Homeland Security currently stuck in the Senate. House Republicans included in a $40 billion package language to stop the president's executive action, which is now stuck in the Senate, with Democrats blocking the bill. Homeland Security's funding expires a week from Friday, February 27th. Speaker John Boehner said, quote, "Hopefully Senate Democrats who claim to oppose this executive overreach will now let the Senate begin debate on a bill to fund the Homeland Security Department." Yet top Senate Democrats are saying Congress should pass a clean funding extension, and then lawmakers can move on to a robust debate on immigration. So far, it doesn't sound like the court action has shifted the political battle. Brett?
Mike, thank you. Joining us now to talk about this, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
First, the practical matter. What does this federal court ruling mean for your department and the president's executive action?
Well, first of all, Brett, in addition to being Secretary of Homeland Security, I'm also a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. I read the judge's decision. It's 123 pages. I read all 123 pages, and I strongly disagree with the judge's ruling. As the president has said, it will be appealed promptly. Very often, appellate courts reverse what lower courts do. And so the executive actions that we were moving forward with are on hold for the time being, but this ruling will definitely be appealed, and I believe it'll be overturned.
But for the people that were ready to move forward, everything's frozen.
At the moment, we're standing down our plans for executive actions pursuant to the judge's injunction, but I believe it'll be reversed.
Do you have any reason to believe that this ruling somehow frees up a deal on Capitol Hill for funding for your department?
Well, we'll see how that's going to play out. There are just 10 calendar days before funding for the Department of Homeland Security expires. 4 working days, as I understand, in Congress. They're out this week. They're back next week. And I'm talking to as many Democrats and Republicans who will listen to me about the importance, especially in these times, of a fully funded Department of Homeland Security. The American public does not want to see Homeland Security for this nation shut down because Congress can't agree on how to fund us.
Here's what you hear from some on the Hill. 2013, government shutdown. 80 to 85% of the employees of the Department of Homeland Security show up for work. They went to work as essential. So how big, really, is this standoff for funding for your department?
Well, it's a huge deal. Let's not forget what a government shutdown looks like. First of all, the Department of Homeland Security is the department of government that interfaces with the American public more than any other. TSA alone interacts with 1.8 million people a day. If we go into shutdown, first of all, that means about 80% of my workforce are forced to come to work without pay. Think about what that means for the working men and women of my department when they are forced to work and they cannot count on a paycheck. Secondly, we've got, and that includes, by the way, the United States Coast Guard. What do I say to the men and women of the United States Coast Guard forwardly deployed who have to work and cannot count on a paycheck? But aside from that, a shutdown means we have to dramatically scale back Homeland Security operations across the board. And I cannot believe that the American public wants us to do that simply because Congress is at an impasse.
So why can't the president call up Senate Democrats and say, let's move this thing through?
We're making every opportunity we can to talk to Senate Democrats, House Republicans, House Democrats, We're talking to everybody. And frankly, the frustrating part for me, when I go up there, I met with some of my Senate friends last week, and they're saying it's not me, it's the guy across the hill. And I meet with my House friends, Republicans and Democrats, who are saying it's not me, it's the Senate. So they're literally doing this right now. And I'm confident, and I'm hoping that Congress will finally sit down together and break this impasse, because we need Homeland Security right now.
What happens if what usually happens here, they punt and there's a stopgap again, what's called a continuing resolution, a CR? What happens to you?
Good question. We're on a continuing resolution right now, which expires on February 27. When you're on a continuing resolution, it's a little like trying to drive across country with no more than 5 gallons of gas at a time, and you don't know when the next gas station is. You can't plan except days and weeks at a time. We're constrained at last year's funding levels, but in addition, we cannot engage in new initiatives, new spending. So right now, I cannot pay for the things on the border that we need for border security. Fortunately, the apprehension numbers on the southern border are down the lowest they've been in a very, very long time, in part because of the things we've put in place there, but I can't pay for that as long as we're on a continuing resolution. We can't fund grants to state and local law enforcement, to police chiefs, to sheriffs. Every mayor, governor, police chief, commissioner, and sheriff should be up in arms about this.
So for the Republicans who say, hey, listen, the president shouldn't put us in this position. He shouldn't have done what he did on executive actions that we, Republicans, they would say, feel were unconstitutional.
If you want to have the immigration debate, let's have an immigration debate. Let's have an immigration debate that is about immigration. Don't tie an insistence on defunding our executive actions to the entire budget of Homeland Security of this nation. Let's have that debate in Congress. We've been asking to have that debate for some time now, but don't tie it to funding for the Homeland Security of this nation, for the safety of the American people.
On ISIS, the president has urged Americans not to exaggerate the threat posed by ISIS. How would you characterize the threat ISIS poses to the Homeland Security?
ISIS represents a very significant potential threat in the following ways. They've got thousands of fighters on the ground in Iraq and Syria. They are depraved. They are willing to kill Americans because they are Americans in a very cruel and public way. Plus, they make very effective and slick use of the internet, social media. They have the ability to reach into home communities and recruit and inspire people, the so-called lone wolves. And so what we need here is not only military action, but a whole-of-government approach that takes account of law enforcement, homeland security, and engaging communities in sessions like the one we're going to have tomorrow at the White House.
Doesn't matter what we call them. When the former DIA head says you can't defeat an enemy that you don't admit exists, doesn't matter what we call them.
ISIL very definitely exists. The way I'd put it is this. You can kill an enemy, but you don't necessarily defeat an enemy if what happens is they're able to recruit faster than we can take them off the battlefield, which is why a whole-of-government approach is so important to dealing with this type of terrorist threat.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Up next, 2 Republicans not at the top of the polls and how they're fighting for political survival even this early in the presidential race. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 4 in Dallas as the judge in the trial of the man accused of killing American sniper Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield denies a defense motion for a mistrial. Later in the day, the prosecution rested its case. Fox 8 in New Orleans with a very chilly Fat Tuesday. Mardi Gras revelers awoke to cold temperatures in the 30s and light rain today. The parties cease tonight at midnight when Lent begins. And this is a live look at Quincy, Massachusetts, where Fox 25 is covering the head of Boston's public transportation system, saying it could be a month before it's running at full capacity following a brutal series of snowstorms. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back.